Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Attention Please podcast, now on video. If you like this podcast, kindly like, share, subscribe. You know what to do. So I'm recording this episode, but this time in India, it's August 15, 2022. So happy Independence Day to everybody. So, of course, this is Independence Day, and I happen to read, unfortunately, yet another Rana Ayub's piece on India. Now, she periodically writes these, and the surprise for me isn't the fact that she writes these. Obviously, there is an audience for this kind of crap. But it's that Washington Post keeps on publishing this, not because what she says is not aligned with what Washington Post says. And here's the kicker. She writes the exact same thing every time. That's my problem. Even when you're, taking something and just making another identical copy in programming, you at least replace the for loops with repeat untils. Come on, man. This piece is exactly the same piece that I've read 3 or 4 times before, almost in the same order. At this point of time, Rana Ayub's pieces are increasingly resemble Mithun Chakravarti's Ooty movies in the late 90s. There's essentially the same thing again and again and again with Mithun Chakravarti in the main lead. And they say exactly the same thing and they end exactly the same way. And they follow the exact same plot template. And her pieces are like that. It's that whole entire, India is a terrible place. India is occupied by Nazis. It's the same thing. She doesn't even bother to change things up. Like, at least move the paragraphs from here and there. I don't understand. Again, I totally get it from her point of view. It's very easy to write these pieces if you can just generate them. But it's just that Washington Post, the editorial controls that they have, I've kind of lost faith in it, in terms of even the syntactic checking. But moving on, happy Azadi ka Amrit Mahotsav. And I think there's also a lot of chatter on social media, as it always is, of course, as to the performative nature of patriotism in India. The flags, let's flood the country with flags. Every house needs to fly a flag. And that this is, again, this chest thumping nationalism. Apparently flags means chest thumping nationalism, which I also don't think is true. Is that, these symbols mean nothing. That this is essentially a way for a failing state. Yes, a failing state to cover up its failures. And that's why they do this kind of, again, I use the word performative patriotism. Read it earlier this morning. So a younger version of me would possibly have perhaps aligned with this opinion a bit more than the older version. Because now, a little older, I understand the worth of symbols in the formation of a cohesive society. So let me try to explain this a little bit. So who's the person we love the most is obviously ourselves. Then we love our parents, our spouses, our children, in some order. And why do we do that? Because we know them, because we align with them, hopefully, on moral values. We align with them on a lot of things. We are very similar. Now, when we are part of a community, how do I know, when I don't know who you are, whether you align with my values? Well, it's an arbitrary judgment. And the way it happens is it happens whether we recognize or we venerate the same symbols. And these symbols can be very arbitrary, like a flag. And what does if you salute the flag or if you raise a flag, does it show you're a patriot? Can't you be a terrorist? Of course you can be. As a matter of fact, terrorists will definitely raise the flag to deflect suspicion. But the point is, there are multiple data points on which, when we see an alignment of our fellow man or fellow woman, do we form a feeling of community? Do we have a feeling of empathy with that person? That's how communities are formed. That's why we have, a shared sense of what is right and what is wrong. And that creates a community, that creates a neighborhood. It's not just a geographical entity. And most of the times our communities are formed by religion, because that basically codifies our moral values. And religions come with symbols and they come with rituals. It's all built in. And the worth of having religious agnostic symbols like the flag, especially in a country like India, cannot be overemphasized. And so while cynical people and some people are just basically hate this government, so whatever they do is bad, even though the Congress did the exact same thing, but it was okay then, I guess. But I think it was okay then and it was okay now, because religion agnostic symbols like the flags are very important. They actually create this shared feeling of kinship. And it's an arbitrary kinship. If you really take a step back, what does it mean? Really nothing. But the fact that we both recognize and respect and wave this symbol on a particular day, obviously we don't need to do it on every day, that kind of creates a bond between us. And that's just the way human beings work. You can scientifically analyze it and say, well, it doesn't mean anything. It really doesn't. But that's the way a nation becomes united. And this might seem, again, to be performative, but ultimately our decision to trust you, my decision to trust you or not, is an emotional decision. It's not a rational decision, ever. So there will always be an emotional part to it. And as an example, I'll say when we touch the feet of our parents, right? I mean, I don't know whether you do, I do. I personally don't believe in God, and I'm an agnostic. But I do touch my feet of my parents. Why? I mean, it's not that I think of them as God, but why do I do it? It's a symbol. It doesn't mean anything. It's a symbol of respect. Now, do my parents expect me? I mean, would they not love me if I didn't touch their feet? No, of course not. But it's a symbol. Why do I do it? Nobody's watching it either. So it's not that there's a camera who's watching it. No, it's not. But somehow when we do things, we kind of think that we are being watched, right? And this just means and when I see somebody, let's say I see somebody touching the feet of their parents, I think, okay, yeah, this guy respects his parents. Now, could absolutely be the case that person doesn't respect their parents at all. And that's absolutely performative. And I'm fooled by that. But in general, you see these and you kind of form an idea. And you see somebody who doesn't, you kind of wonder a little bit. Well, it kind of hit me, right? So again, this example, I just made it up, but it does say something. These symbols may be arbitrary, these rituals may be arbitrary, but they say something about you. And you do it. I do it even now, even though I really don't know why I do it. But I do it. And I guess it comforts me. And I think that there's somebody watching, and I think it shows. I think I'm at least to my parents still showing that I respect them. And I do. But I'm pretty sure that my touching their feet has no impact on my parents' assessment of how much I respect them also. So rationally, logically, there is no reason to do it. But we do it. And I can't tell, I can't speak for my parents, but if I don't touch their feet, I don't know how they would feel. Because I haven't never not done it. So I don't know. So we do these things. We do these things even within a family, and we definitely should do these things outside, that's why I always feel you should stand for the national anthem, even though it's random and arbitrary, and what does it truly show? But it shows, at least to the people around you, that you and them have some kind of shared values, even though it might be an arbitrary expression of that shared value. So that's one thing that I feel about quote unquote performative patriotism. Seen it on social media, so thought I would put my hot take out on it. The other thing that I've seen, and again, it's not that I haven't talked about it before, but this is the time when history starts getting discussed, particularly on Twitter. And it's interesting and amusing. And I don't claim to be a historian, but there are, of course, certain things that I know about history, because I genuinely love history, and I read a lot about it. Not nowadays, actually, I haven't read a lot of history in the last 10 years. But when I was in high school, I read a lot of history. It was by far my favorite subject, and especially my focus was on the independence struggle. I wasn't very interested in ancient or medieval history, or even Mughal history. It was purely everything after 1857. I was all obsessed about it at one point of time. So one thing that I saw again on Twitter, because the Congress and most of the history that we read growing up is essentially Congress history. It's communist. The historians were all leftists, and they were financed by Congress. So everything that we read is basically colored through that lens, to the extent that we don't even know what is true anymore sometimes. So again, I'm not going to get into that. And many people have gotten into that. Arun Shuri at one point of time, before he became the spurned BJP minister, wrote books, tomes about this. But one thing that I was reading, and again, it came on my Twitter feed, was that RSS never respected the tricolor. So the implication is that RSS is not a patriotic organization in that sense that the guys who are like fluttering the tricolor today never respected it, never raised it. Well, here's the little thing about it. See, the reason why the RSS, first of all, it's not that the RSS didn't respect the tricolor or that they didn't respect an Indian flag or they didn't respect the idea of India, which is the implication that Congress aligned political parties and politicians want you to think. That was not the reason. The reason was, in my opinion, fairly silly, the reasons. So when India became independent, the fact that there were these three colors that were chosen, saffron, white, and green. So the interpretation was saffron stands for Hindu, green stands for Islam, and white stands for everybody else. So the objection that RSS had was that, well, Muslims got green, they got Pakistan, man, they got their full flag there. So why are they getting like 1/3 of this? Why are they being looked upon as different from others? If others get a white, then why are they getting green and why are we getting 1/3 of that? Then we should either be full saffron or they should be merged with the white. So this was their main problem was not with the flag, but with the color scheme of the flag. See, that's the truth. If you read, you can go and read that. So the reason why they had a problem, at least some of their ideologues had problems, again, I think it's very silly, is because they didn't like the color scheme. And that's why later on, whenever we read the history books, sometimes the teacher would say that fact, Hindu, Muslim, but it was that green stands for prosperity, white stands for peace, and saffron stands for sacrifice. I don't know why, as a nation, we have to sacrifice. I think that's, again, comes back to a very Gandhian ideal that I don't understand. But okay, all right. Prosperity, peace, I get. So that was one thing that again, that's obviously not true. The second thing was another thing that Jairam Ramesh, another Congress intellectual, said about Shyama Prasad Mukherjee and about the partition of Bengal. So you say, will Narendra Modi talk about Shyama Prasad Mukherjee, who obviously the BJP idolizes, that he wanted the division of Bengal? That's absolutely, that's technically correct. But what he doesn't mention is that what he objected was entire Bengal going to East Pakistan. That was what he objected to. So Bengal was going to be independent. It was, that idea was floated principally, and again, he doesn't take the name of Surawardi, who was the governor of Bengal and who was the real guy behind the great Calcutta killing, the 1946 Direct Action Day riots. So he wanted Bengal to be independent. So a number of Bengali intellectuals wanted that. And again, this comes back to why the Bengali nationalism and why BJP never can make a foray into state politics, in my opinion, because of this. But because the Bengali identity was considered to be a more powerful identity than the Hindu identity. And that was why there was a significant groundswell of, let's have Bengal as an independent country, state, whatever it is, but let's not divide Bengal. At which point of time, Shyama Prasad Mukherjee very rightly said, no, you have to divide Bengal. It is because of Shyama Prasad Mukherjee that Calcutta is in India. Otherwise, it would have gone to quote unquote East Pakistan. It would be in Bangladesh today. And looking at the state of Hindus in Bangladesh, you know exactly what would have happened to people, right? So this is what Shyama Prasad Mukherjee really did. Again, there are lots of things you can say about Shyama Prasad Mukherjee, lots of things you can say about the Jan Sangh. And I just said the RSS's objection to the tricolor was silly and petty. But you can't lie about what Shyama Prasad Mukherjee actually did. And that was one of his greatest contributions to Bengalis. And which unfortunately, many Bengalis also don't acknowledge. They might acknowledge in private, but no, they think he broke Bengalis, but he didn't. He foresaw what was going to happen. And the last thing that I wanted to conclude with was more a personal story. So I tweeted a picture of my grandfather, so Jyotirmoy Rai's Tamropatra. This is a bronze plaque which was given to him in the late 80s by Rajiv Gandhi and under Indira. You would see, on the bronze plaque, the Rajiv Gandhi's name and Indira Gandhi's name. My grandfather's name is like etched there on the bottom, but the prominent names are Indira Gandhi and Rajiv Gandhi, none of whom who did anything for independence. my grandfather did. He served hard time in Andaman Islands in the cellular jail. And for those of you who don't know, and they compare Jawaharlal Nehru's incarceration with people in cellular jail, including V.R. Savarkar. This was like, there's no comparison between the two, the kind of hardship and that's why Jawaharlal Nehru didn't go to cellular jail. That's why, because this was the place where they sent the worst of the worst. This was where they sent the foot soldiers. This was hard time. And Jawaharlal Nehru, again, I don't want to get into this bash Jawaharlal Nehru. That's also excessive, I've said before. Jawaharlal Nehru, to me, his greatest achievement is after independence. It's not before independence. Before independence, it's a lot of PR by Congress as to what his contribution was. He was put there as a leader because his dad was influential. It's basically, Karan Johar filmmaking that got him to be prominent before independence. Yes, his statesmanship and his leadership was after independence. He took India to a place where if there was some other prime minister, India might not have gone. And that has to be recognized as the legacy of Jawaharlal Nehru. But that doesn't mean that before independence, he was a great, he brought India independence. No, he didn't. Again, he was a leader, and he was a leader who was put on the top because his dad was very influential. That was the reason. And the thing was, when you're comparing Jawaharlal Nehru with people who lived in, people who did hard time in cellular jail, like my grandfather. I mean, nobody knows my grandfather's name, like so many other people's names. I mean, the reason why I'm saying is because he's my grandfather, honestly, right? So Jawaharlal Nehru stayed at a place where he had materials to write scholarly work. This is not internet days. He couldn't just go to a laptop and find things. He got research material for writing a book, a really good history book, I would say. If there's anything, if you don't like Jawaharlal Nehru as a prime minister, please do read Jawaharlal Nehru as a historian. You might not like some of his interpretations, but in terms of lucidly writing about history, there are very few people who can write with such lucidity and such modern way of writing. It's a pleasure to read. I went to India. Again, I fished out my old copies of Jawaharlal Nehru to read them when I was in high school. And I read it and I was still like, wow, it's so beautifully written. Jawaharlal Nehru could write like nobody else on history and on India. So, but the point is, he could still write that, right? He was at a place, he was at an emotional and physical place where he could write something like that. It's not an easy write. It's not like, me doing this podcast. You can't do it when you're being tortured. You can't write like that. So the amount of material that he had access to. So when we talk about Jawaharlal Nehru's serving jail, again, I don't want to say it was nothing, but I also don't like it being compared to the kind of jail time my grandfather did. And what did he get out of it? Honestly, nothing. Not just him. A generation of people got nothing out of the time that they served, the best period of their life that they gave to this country for the future of people whom they would never meet. And that to me is the significance of Independence Day. This is more than anything else, more than perhaps the flag waving and everything. For me, it's a day of remembrance. And I would like it to be like that. Is to remember people who we normally don't remember. So I remember my grandfather. And I hope that you remember somebody who's special to you, who was part of the freedom struggle. For me, I can experience it to my grandfather because I saw him. That's why. And that's important because as the 75th year becomes 100, these forgotten names will become more and more forgotten, right? Let's be pragmatic. We will remember the names of Jawaharlal Nehru because it will be maintained. That name will be maintained. No matter what Ashutosh says, that they don't want to remember Jawaharlal Nehru because they don't want to remember democracy. The thing is, Jawaharlal Nehru will be remembered. Mahatma Gandhi will be remembered. These people will be remembered. But people like my grandfather, many people like him. He was not the only person. There were hundreds of people like him in jail, hundreds of people outside who died, who didn't even get to jail. That we don't forget them. And we will, because they're not in history books. No political party, I mean, their kids didn't go and become prime ministers, so they don't have immortality like that. But we should talk about them. That's why I'm talking about him. I'm talking about him so that I remember. And I'm talking about him so that those of you who listen to this podcast, I don't know how many of you listen to this podcast, that you remember, at least on this day, Sri Jyotirmoy Roy. Remember that name. And thank you, everybody, for listening to this podcast. I'll be back hopefully in a week. Bye-bye.